Dr. Wald, good to have you as always. And we have a Super Bowl coming up between the Rams and the Bengals this weekend. What's your
Do.
prediction?
I'm going to go with the Rams,
The
mostly
Rams.
because I want the Rams to win because I want Odell Beckham Jr. to win a Super
Oh,
Bowl.
the Giants connection there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, I've always liked Matt Stafford.
I was going to say that anyone who has had to suffer as long as he had to with the Lions, it's hard not to have some sympathy for. I'm not a Rams fan,
Yeah.
but it's hard not to have some
Yeah.
sympathy. So I really don't care per se. So whoever
I
wins.
just like a good game, honestly. I don't want like one of those like stupid blowout games. I'd like something fun to watch. Like the the conference championships were really like that was some good football.
Yeah,
I'd
all the
like
playoffs,
I'd like a
the
good
last two
game.
rounds have been great, haven't they? It's been crazy. So,
Yeah.
okay, we do have a guest coming on here in a minute. But first, I was talking to someone yesterday, and they were complimenting our last episode with Dr. Dean Foreman. So,
Ooh.
I'd say that. So, thank you to that. Okay, let's get into the show. Let's see here. Russia China Inc. new energy deal amid rising Ukraine tensions. I mean, water's wet, sky's blue. China loves Russia. I can't finish the rhyme, so I don't know. What do you think?
No, I thought this was significant because I think I talked about this maybe last week on the
You did.
podcast where
You did.
I was saying that that even if there's some sort of like sanctions or whatnot against Russian oil and gas going to Europe or the US, that doesn't mean that Russian oil and gas is coming off the market
Hmm.
because they'll turn around and sell to China. And some people were like, no, the infrastructure isn't there. China's not going to buy more sanctioned oil, or they can't. Yeah, and well, they're already signing more deals for oil. So I just thought this was a interesting development to keep in mind that Russia is already looking more towards the east.
Yeah, I mean, I think my comment was if the Russians believe that the sanctions were going to happen and have an impact, they would. But I don't think the Russians buy that uh, narrative. So the question would be: is this a diversion of the current, or is this an addition to, or how do we think about that? So are we thinking? Are you just saying that generally speaking that the Russians and the Chinese are going to do deals together? Your view.
Yeah, I'm saying that they're going to do deals together. I think that I think that if Russia was, in a sense, I was actually kind of thinking that a sign that Russia maybe is a little concerned that there might be some kind of retaliation from the West or from the United States would be to see, are they making plans to send more oil and gas to China? And the answer is they are clearly making plans and to send more oil and gas to China. I think if you're the Saudis, then either China is your big market, so you've either got to say we need to maybe lower our prices a little bit, which they did not. They actually raised their prices for March, or they're going to say, well, you know, because if there are sanctions, then Saudi could reroute its oil from China to the West. They could try to take back more of the European market. But I think it's significant. I don't think that Russia is all that concerned about. Like some people were saying, oh, well, Russia won't do this because it needs markets for its oil, and I think that this shows that Russia is not all that concerned about finding markets for its oil.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you there. I still don't think that the Russians are concerned about the sanctions. Though. I'm not. I don't think that they've changed their stance on that. I saw Germany came out and said something bad will happen if you do these things, and we're gonna be really mad. Yada yada yada. But that was. I don't think the
Germany
Russians
will be
mean.
mad if you take away our major source of energy.
Yeah. I mean, I do wonder. 10 years from now when we're doing this show, if we're talking about the fact that the Swift network is no longer relevant. I mean, as these deals continue to pile up and these nations continue to align, the Russians won't. take the. I know Big Oren was talking about this the other day on Twitter, saying that you know, anyways. Um, but I don't think the Russians, for the next 20 years, will take U.S. sanctions on their ability to do business deals. I can't see that happening, and I think the Chinese are working on ways to circumvent that. So um, I wonder how much longer the threat of sanctions. It's not obviously it's imminent today, but 10 years from now, will the threat of sanctions even hold any weight, or will the U.S. lose its stronghold to control the banking system? And deals like this would seem to stress that capacity on some level.
Yeah, without a doubt. You know, it's interesting also because Chinese companies have invested, are big investors in Russian oil and gas projects. Apparently, CNPC owns 20% of the shares of the Yamal LNG project, and they bought that in 2013. And in 2016, Chinese banks lent Novatech $12 billion for the project. So, you know, I mean, this isn't. You should be surprised.
Right.
There's already a lot
That's yeah,
of
right. That's what I was saying.
financing going on.
That's what I was saying. Is that okay? This isn't necessarily a big deal. Now, if you think it's tied to the Ukrainian thing, then there could be something there. Um, I suspect though this
I
deal is
think the
gonna be worked
timing
on.
of it, you know, the timing of it is kind of a way to say, haha,
Yeah.
look,
Okay.
we don't
Yeah,
need your markets.
yeah, quite possibly. Okay. Let's see here. Should Europe use more long-term LNG contracts? Well, I mean, this it feels like this is something that we've talked about for quite some time. The Europeans have made their own bed, and they have no one to blame for but themselves. And this was not something that you couldn't have predicted. It it feels like sometimes we're trying to have the hindsight conversation when we don't need the hindsight conversation on this one. This wasn't.
Yeah,
Oh
it's
wow, this
kind of
caught us off
interesting.
guard. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
it was kind of interesting because I was kind of wondering like why is Europe so opposed to these long term contracts? And apparently, the European Commission believes that long term contracts inhibit free flows of gas in Europe, which seems to be like maybe an odd position to take. But they're basically saying that it says so as a reaction to single players such as Russia being able to take advantage of a dominant position, EU policymakers have encouraged spot trade that can allow customers to benefit from reduced prices when supplies are abundant. So we're taking the position basically that we're discouraging long-term contracts because prices are low, so you should just buy whatever from whomever on the spot market, and that is the way you should do things. Plus, they don't want. Apparently, part of it is also because they feel like long-term LNG contracts will lock European customers into fossil fuel contracts, which they don't want. So basically, because of these two weird reasons, they've locked themselves into Russia because Russia was providing the cheapest natural gas. Now that gas is more expensive, you can't just buy cheap. The spot market's not so good, and they've basically locked themselves out of suppliers like Qatar, where Qatar really prefers long term, generally oil index contracts for revenue stability, which makes complete sense. If you're an LNG exporter, you want a long term contract because you're not going to invest in expanding your LNG capacity, export capacity, unless you know you've got a market for it. So, and we're talking 10 to 25 years. And so it seems like part of the issue is the EU's like weird ideas about competition and their energy transition strategy. Like, no, don't enter into long term contracts because we don't want you to use fossil fuels.
Well, on some level, I can be sympathetic to the argument that prices were low because they were low for many years. But if you're talking about a 25-year contract, to project out the prices for 25 years to say that it's going to be low for the next 25 years, therefore we're going to buy on the spot market. That seems to be a little bit risky. I mean, seems to be a little bit risky. And so here you find yourself in the spot, and now if you want to lock in a long term contract where you're paying what double, I don't know, double-ish from what you would have paid a couple years ago. And I mean, I, I think it's easy to get bought into these narratives. We all are guilty of it. Natural gas prices won't come back anytime soon. Okay, that's that's fine. We all thought that in 2018, 2019. Um, but for 25 years was that's a different projection, right? And so if you're buying these long-term contracts, why would you risk it? The flip side of that is, okay, let's say the price is going to stay low for the foreseeable future. Is it gonna get any lower? Probably not. Like, we're probably hovering around the bottom range, which means the risk is that the price will go up, not that the price is gonna go down anymore. So, you might save a smidge, but the potential is that you're gonna lose a lot as the prices climb. So, I don't understand the kind of the risk strategy there. Um, so makes me wonder if the transition is really more pushing it than buying it cheap at the spot price.
Hmm. That's a good point. Yeah, that is a good point. Um, hmm. So so then the question is, um, what is the issue? So apparently now, like the U.S. has now suddenly become like the largest LNG exporter. I'm not sure how they're measuring that. I just saw that from Bloomberg sometime today.
Mhm.
Is that really like? I'm not sure like that's really true. I'm not sure how they're measuring it. Maybe it says there were 80 cargoes a month coming from the United States. Each cargo was making $60 million in net profit.
It's not bad.
Wow.
It's not bad.
Yeah.
That's not bad.
But another interesting thing is that apparently Qatar and some Asian producers like Indonesia and Malaysia used to enforce destination clauses to
Mhm.
limit the delivery of gas to certain markets to prevent it from being rerouted to other markets. So they're saying if you buy our gas, you can't resell it somewhere else. And apparently Europe says these clauses are illegal. And they so the EU could say like, oh, we're buying your gas from Indonesia, and then it like gets part of the way there, and they're like, ah, actually, we could make more money if we sold it to somewhere else and used coal.
Mhm. Mhm.
And apparently, Qatar and Indonesia don't like that idea, probably because they'd
Right.
rather make the money selling it to wherever instead of so
Well, I mean,
so
I do have a question for you. So let's just say if you're sitting there right now and you're trying to decide, okay, do we go ahead and lock in prices right now, long-term contracts, or do we wait a few years and hope the market rebalances and the prices go back down? What would be your advice to the EU if they're trying to make that decision right now? And it's not EU, but it's to use a term, insert country
um
here.
Yeah, I mean, if I was the EU and I needed, and I was really in a crunch now, I would maybe. But see, it's not the EU negotiating these contracts. It's like a utility company, and
Yeah,
with a
yeah,
utility
yeah.
company,
I
it's
know.
going to
That's
be
what I
able
said.
to, yeah, yeah. So I
I'm
would say
using a
like,
term just so we don't pick
yeah,
on you
if
particularly.
policy wise, I think what the EU could do is maybe offer like financing or something, or like offer to help these like
Mhm.
utilities or whatever make these long term deals. I think they should make a few. I don't think they should try to like cover a lot, but they should let it be known that their attitude has shifted
Mhm.
by entering into negotiations, even though prices are high, showing they're willing to diversify despite higher prices. So they're willing like that they value a diversity of sources more than just the bottom line cheapest gas,
Right.
and then do more when the prices come down.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you'd have to say a certain amount of your portfolio increase to lock in the contract because look at the prices right now. We have WTI at 91, Brent at 92, and gas is at 417. Um, okay, and that's not we're not just going. I mean, I talked to a guy yesterday in Midland, Texas, who went out there for work. Okay, let me read this to you. He was blown away, so he texted me about this thing. Let's see, where's he at? Where's he at? This is a Holiday Inn. Holiday Inn. I think it's a Holiday Inn out in the Permian Basin, right in Midland. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think a room's going for right now?
Oh gosh,
Yeah, Holiday Inn. Yeah,
$200 a night.
try 89.
Oh, that's cheap.
Super cheap. 89, Midland, Texas, last night.
Ooh, huh?
Right?
Is there
right?
like any drilling happening?
So we start. Yeah, that's what he texted me. I goes, dude, something's crazy. Like this is, and so then he said that he said, oh gosh, something about some frac crews. Let's see here. Yeah, some companies I've been talking to are dropping frac crews, not adding.
Wow.
Yeah, so I still have to say, you know, if the prices were high and the drilling was going crazy, and listen, I'm not that's anecdotal, I get it, but the Midland hotel price range is usually a pretty good indicator.
What was it? Yeah.
I mean, yeah,
What was it
200 would
back?
be 200 would be like you're saying, that would have been a good guess.
Yeah.
That's what I would have guessed if I didn't know. So either he found some kind of crazy Groupon deal and he's not telling me, or something's going on that's kind of weird. With that being said, um, the sentiment in the U.S. right now doesn't appear that you're about to see, you know, wide scale drilling in the Haynesville, the Barnett, um,
Yeah.
the Appalachian, all those basins, or the Permian. You're going to see some uptick, but not a lot. So I think you have to lock in some of this because the price might not go back down the next 5-10 years. It might. I don't know, but we're in a weird spot. The
Hmm.
price is not
Hmm.
incentivizing this huge drill. This huge rush to drill down the price like it has historically. So
Yeah.
how long do you bank on that not happening? At some point, it has to
Yeah.
happen. You think, but it's not. And I wouldn't know what to tell people other than I think you're right. You had to do some of it, but the fact that we're not just seeing the people go gangbusters at this prices is a little bit worrisome for where the price is. But listen, 6 months from now, we're talking about the price back at $2, and they'd be laughing at us. So I don't know. It's just a weird feel
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah. It is. I mean, we don't know. Although apparently the White House now says it's working with Germany to ensure Nord Stream 2 pipeline does not move forward if Russia invades Ukraine.
Okay, turn the pipeline on, people. Turn the pipeline on if you want to prevent them from
Here's the thing:
invading.
the whole point of the whole reason they're stymieing the pipeline is because of EU regulations that have to do with you can't have the same company operating the pipeline as owns the pipeline.
Yeah,
That's the only thing standing in the way. I mean, other than I guess the United States at this point. Like like that was the last hurdle. Was the EU was like, no, we have regulations that don't allow you to do this. You have to have somebody else, like some other company, operate the pipeline because, and the whole thing is just so stupid. So I don't know. I mean, what exactly are they going to do? Are they just going to keep up this regulation and Gazprom is just they're just going to keep on not giving Gazprom approval, or are they going to open up the pipeline? Apparently it's ready to go. Apparently it's full of gas, ready to go.
well, okay. If you opened up Nord Stream 2 and the Russians didn't deliver, then you kind of have shifted the whatever sentiments out there. Like, okay, listen, Russia, we opened up your pipeline. We're trying to let it flow, and you're still being jerks about the Ukraine stuff. Like, you can at least
Hmm.
shift the perspective some. Um, but I don't know. We'll see. Okay, let's see here. We've got time for a couple more. All right, Dr. Wald, you're on. What's going
Which
on?
one?
Your boy Biden, he's going to do a deal with him.
Oh, Iran. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I've been saying for a while that if Biden wants to move the oil market, or I've been saying he could always pull that out of his pocket if he wants a win or to declare some sort of win before the midterms. But look it does look like things are moving more aggressively with Iran. I think there was some confusion over what the latest, move actually did in terms of sanctions. And so this article is kind of explaining that, not yet. So the State Department said to Congress that it was restoring a sanctions waiver to allow third party participation in nuclear nonproliferation safety projects. Da, da, da. That's so some people were like, oh my God, a deal is imminent. I don't think that is true. It's interesting. So S&P has a chart where they're showing what they think They think that Iran oil sanctions relief is a top 2022 supply risk. So they're showing how much oil they think Iran will be able to put on the market if there is some kind of deal. I don't know. I think they're kind of optimistic about the amount of oil that Iran will put on the market. I don't see us getting that much more than 100. That is that much more than 1 million barrels a day. I think their numbers are kind of optimistic for Iran. Um, but I mean, I would. It would not surprise me if this is like the SPR release didn't work. If they really want to bring down the price of oil and price of gasoline, if we see some more aggressive movement on the Iran talks to the point where oil sanctions, there's some kind of sanctions relief um, in order to get more oil on the market, which I mean, if it's not a temporary measure, like I think what we saw with Venezuela, where they're like, oh, we'll let, what is it, like Chevron get oil from Venezuela that because they're owed money, that's like a
Hmm.
temporary thing.
Hmm.
That's like a one time deal, like an SPR release. Iran coming back on the market is a totally different thing. I think you'll see India really excited to buy Iranian oil, especially. And what was interesting also though? So people are all like, "Oh, the price of oil is so high. Price of oil is so high." Part of the reason why the price of oil is so high is inflation. So if you look at the last time the price of oil started like went above 90 in January or the first time was in 2008. That's the first time it hit 90. If you took today's price of oil in 2008, like that would have been, I think, if you took today's dollars and looked at the price of oil, then it would have been that would be 123, I think, in our dollars.
Okay, so hold on.
So
Well, that's important because I'm just looking up hotel rates right now in Midland because you got me on something. So the DoubleTree, which is in like downtown Midland, tonight, right now, this is a live look. If I were to book it, it's $125. So take
wow,
your
that's
inflation
a nice
theory,
hotel, or
right? So you got
nicer.
your inflation theory that you're talking about, and yet the Midland hotel prices are low. They should be hitting the inflation too, right?
Yeah, yeah. So
So
it's just, I
it's
just
even
think it's,
worse, right?
yeah. So I get like, yeah, oil prices are high, but they're not like that high. Now, in absolute terms, in terms of money for people and what kind of money people have, yeah, I get it. That doesn't make oil more affordable.
Hmm.
But, um, like in 2008, in January, would have been like 123. So
Okay.
inflation, it's a
Yeah.
serious problem. Apparently not in Midland hotels.
No. Okay. So this
So
is, I just saw my buddy Sergio Chapa from Bloomberg tweet this out from at LNG Allies. And so here is some charts on U.S. LNG exports to Europe. All right. And so here was, let's see here. This, get this, Dr. Wald. Okay. Here's this, I believe. This is U.S. LNG exports by quarter through 2020-21. Okay. So the U.S. is, I guess, we're the top bar there. Is that us? No, that's Europe. Okay, that's Europe. We're the bottom bar. Okay. So you can see the distribution to Europe through there, and um, it looks relatively static, though, right? I mean, we picked up a little bit in 2021. At the end of 2020, we didn't have a whole lot, but there's through 2019 and early 2020, it's, I don't know, I'd say we're in the range, but the distribution to Europe was kind of similar in 2019, and then it kind of picked up at the end of 2019 and 2020. And they were kind of back to that level, I guess. I don't know. Just kind of look at this chart. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on it.
hmm. Can't could you make the chart bigger? Or I could make, well, let me make my screen. Oh, here we go.
Does that
Okay.
help?
Oh, yeah. No, I made my screen bigger.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And that too. Okay. Oh, yeah. That is an interesting chart. Huh. Huh. I
So they are
mean,
buying more from the U.S. currently than they were in
yeah,
2020,
yeah,
and 2019 for the most part. But they're not as much as they were buying at the beginning of 2020 at the end of 2019. So
yeah,
I know it's kind of confusing. I'll hit retweet on this chart here so people can see this if they follow
yeah,
along.
yeah. That
But
is interesting.
yeah. So anyways, I saw Sergio had tweeted that out, and so here's the top 5 importers of U.S. LNG since February 2016: South Korea, Japan,
South
China,
Korea, Japan, China.
Spain, Mexico, Brazil, India, UK, Chile, France, Turkey,
Hmm.
Netherlands, Taiwan, Italy, Argentina. So
Huh.
a lot of Asia, a lot of Asia there.
A lot of Asian. Well, yeah. I mean, remember that was the big deal when they were trying to build these LNG plants. I remember in like 2012 and 2013 because they needed to get like waivers from the government
Mhm.
in order to do that because we didn't have like free trade contracts with these Asian countries. And so I remember that was what was holding the Obama administration was holding up a lot of these a lot of these intentions to because remember a lot of these were built as regasification terminals, and then suddenly we didn't need to import to import LNG, and so they converted them to gasification terminals. But the big buyers were all in Asia, and we didn't have these like free trade or trade contracts, so like the Obama administration had to approve them, and they were holding them up. I don't know. This is what I remember, like way back in 2013.
Yeah, no, no. Okay, let's see here. Maybe time for one more. I see our guest is in the green room. Okay, okay, she can hear us. Okay, let's see if we can bring her on here. Okay, can you hear us, Christine?
I can. Can you hear
Perfect.
me?
Yes, perfect, perfect, perfect. Okay, we can't see, but that is perfectly fine.
How?
Okay,
I don't
uh,
know why.
that's all right. It works. It's we just couldn't tell. We usually say give us a thumbs up or something, but that's okay. Okay.
Try clicking the camera button if you want to turn your camera on. There's like a camera button.
Yeah, it looks like it's on, but hmm.
No worries.
It's
We're
okay
good.
if you don't want to be on
Yep.
camera. We
We're
Oh
can.
okay.
no, I don't mind at all.
Okay, so Christine Williams is our guest, the author of Gaslighted: How the Oil and Gas Industry Shortchanges Women Scientists. Okay, Dr. Wald is holding
I'm
a
holding up
lovely
a
cover
copy.
right there. We'll link to the book
Yeah,
in the show notes. Okay, so
yeah.
oh,
Oh,
there
there it
you
is.
are. Hey, Christine.
Hi.
We'll pull you up here on the big screen. How about that? There we go. Okay, so I always ask this question. Give us kind of the backstory for the book. What made you want to write it, and what was that process like?
Well, I'm a sociologist, so I specialize in the study of gender and workplace issues. Like I've studied discrimination and harassment in a lot of different workplace settings. But this particular study came about because I was approached by a group of women scientists who wanted to understand why women were leaving the oil and gas industry. So it was a pretty well known observation that after 5 years, women were coming in, and especially the geoscientists were graduating in similar numbers as men. And they were getting jobs in similar numbers as men, but after 5 years, they were gone. So it was kind of a good question for a sociologist. Why would people who have gone to the trouble of getting a master's degree, gotten a pretty high paying job in the oil industry, one of the most powerful industries in the world, why would they leave? And I got hooked on the question, and so that led to the book and to the project.
And so, one question I do have, just when you're setting up these frameworks, is obviously there's a handful of possible solutions that could be in play here, right? And so, for each different person that leaves, there's maybe they have one main reason, but they also have some sub reasons, and then some they have kind of just they're not really sure they left. How do you go about just kind of sorting that data and ranking it so that you can put together a thesis?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And most of the research that had been done had basically been, people reflecting on a decision that they made years ago. So what I decided to do with working with a colleague was to actually follow a cohort of scientists over time. So we thought that if we could really sort of follow up with them every year about their thinking, what was going on in their careers, were they aspiring to management, were they thinking of leaving. We could actually pinpoint the reasons as they were unfolding for why people were choosing to leave, their lucrative jobs. And well, as luck would have it, those 5 years that I was doing the study overlapped with a major decline in oil prices. So the company I was studying, like many of the others, started laying off people left and right, and very draconian cuts to their technical staff. And that's when I realized that women were bearing the brunt of these cuts. Now, that's not to say that women don't leave for other reasons. Prior to the decline in oil prices, prior to the collapse, women and men did leave the company, but they didn't leave the industry. They went to other companies. They didn't leave the industry until the downturn, because, of course, when this company was laying off employees, so were all the others. So it's very difficult to find another job there. So this is sort of the punchline of the book, and that's the idea that it's these disparities in the layoffs, these gender disparities in the layoffs that help us to understand why the industry stays male dominated. Because if you target the women, or if women are bearing the brunt of the layoffs, that means you're basically wiping out any progress that you make on diversity during the boom times.
Stunned by the boldness of your conclusion. You write in the introduction, after 10 years of researching this question, I think I now have the answer. Women leave the oil and gas industry because they are forced out. And it was very interesting to see how this layoff mechanism works. I've never worked for a large company, so I wasn't really familiar with how it works. But you really shed a lot of light on the internal processes by which this occurs. And I was wondering if you thought, and given that you have studied other industries, is this mechanism, layoffs that happen during downturns and women bearing the brunt of the layoffs, do you think it is applicable across other industries, or is it particularly acute in the oil industry because the oil industry suffers from a lot of these boom and bust extreme cycles?
No, it's a great question and a great observation. I think that targeting women for layoffs happens in all professional fields, but I think it's particularly acute in the oil industry because of these compressed boom and bust cycles. When the price of oil is high, companies go on hiring sprees and compete for talent. They offer signing bonuses, all sorts of other perks. But when the price of oil crashes, the labor force is slashed and people are forced to leave. And when when they lose their jobs during layoffs, jobs are typically scarce in other companies as well. So this is really something that's precipitating mass leaving of the industry when it does happen. So yeah, no, I do think it's particularly acute in the oil and gas industry precisely because these cycles are just, well, they're almost inevitable. I mean, I have to think there's got to be better ways to organize an industry, but in this one, it's pretty well accepted that there will be boom and bust, and they will be coming sooner than you think.
One of the other things that was kind of interesting, and you alluded, I can't remember which particular vignette this was, but there was a woman who ended up, I think she left before the bust cycle to go work for a European company I think it was in the United States, but it was a European company. They had a lot better. She felt like they were just had a lot. Their maternity leave policies were better, and they were much more accommodating to women. And in general, European companies, at least operating in Europe, have very strict rules about like you basically can't fire someone. It's like impossible to fire someone. And so I was wondering if, I don't know if you have knowledge of how these European companies work, but do they have similar layoff policies, or is this really an American phenomenon?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. It's another great question. it is true that they lack the same culture of layoffs in Europe as they do in the United States. On the other hand, I don't see a lot of women heading up oil companies in Europe. So that makes me think that there may be another mechanism at
Mm.
work that helps to explain the male domination of the industry elsewhere. So I think it's a really good question, and I'd love to do research on European oil industries to try
Mm.
to figure out what's going on over there.
Yeah, I mean, and the Middle East is obviously a totally different ball game. As as you do bring up in the introduction, that a lot of the biggest oil companies are actually in the Middle East, and they're Middle Eastern companies, and so, it's been an interesting kind of journey, I think, for women in those companies. I've met some of them. And the interesting thing is some of these companies are holdovers of American companies, and so they may
Mhm.
have inherited some of these American sensibilities, which aren't, as you point out, aren't particularly better towards women in the workplace than Middle Eastern companies. Do you have any thoughts you want to share on that?
Well, I mean, I'm talking to the expert right now, so I feel like you probably know so much more about the reasons for women's the barriers or obstacles that women face in terms of leadership opportunities, management opportunities, and in those countries in the middle, those companies in the Middle East. My sense is that segregation in the workplace is a much bigger
Mm.
factor there than it is in the United States, and that might pose particular difficulties in terms of climbing a corporate ladder. Um, it's complicated also by cultural issues. But the main point is we see the male domination of this industry in lots of different areas around the world. And and it's probably not one single set of reasons that explains it
Yeah.
for all countries and for
Yeah.
all companies. I do think that the layoffs are a big issue
Yeah.
in the United States.
So do you think that what maybe if you don't mind speculating a little bit on some solutions, do you think the solution is to eliminate or to change the business culture of layoffs, or is maybe the solution to change the attitude of the managers? Because you do write a lot in the conclusion about how when layoffs come around, managers kind of default to these um, innate biases that they have to make layoffs because there's nothing
Mm-hmm.
preventing them from accessing them. So, do you think that the solution is more to try to change these innate biases, or to just change the culture of layoffs?
Well, I do think that the culture of layoffs need to change for a variety of reasons that we can talk about in addition. But let me just focus on this question of bias. What I really observed in terms of bias was certainly a bias against women scientists. Women scientists are simply not considered as deserving as men. But I think that it's particularly mothers that are targeted by these biased views. There's almost we can almost think of it in terms of a motherhood penalty, and my research did reveal that of the women that lost their jobs, so many were mothers. It was almost as if the companies were targeting mothers of young children for layoffs, and why would that be? Why would mothers be targeted? I don't write a lot about this in the book, but in an article that I published about this, me and my co-authors found that instead of being targeted, fathers of young children were actually protected from layoffs. They were the group least likely to lose their job during the downturn. So you gotta ask yourself, where is this coming from? Where is this bias against mothers coming from? Um, well, I got to think that when managers are sitting down and making their hard decisions about whom to let go, um, one thing that they might look at is, well, who's taken leave in the last year? And a mother of a young child probably took a leave of 6 weeks, 3 months. One that
Hmm.
was negotiated with her supervisor, but nevertheless one that might make her look less productive. than other people, including women without children who she might have been competing against. Yeah, but I also think that in addition to that kind of structural reasons or for why a mother might be dinged, I think that there's still very old-fashioned attitudes that are ascendant in this industry that, men are the family breadwinners and the mother's place is in the home. And when you're making a decision about who to lay off, those kinds of attitudes can certainly raise raise their ugly face. I think so.
Let me ask a question on the bias. Something I thought about before when I was hiring people is, when you go to hire someone, I would always reach out to all my contacts that I thought might know someone who could fit the job, right? Which is
Hmm.
obviously going to be male dominated because that's mainly who I talk to is other men as a man. That's who my friends are. So they're likely to recommend another male. So part of the problem you would see in that bias is that it's not necessarily I'm not trying to be biased, but just the nature of the process lends itself to certain type of candidates and it's excluding other candidates just by how I'm thinking. It's not trying to be impacting anyone, but when you're hiring someone, you want a good reference, and you can't really get one unless you can talk to someone to get the real story.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, I'm assuming a lot of people try to operate that way as possible, which means if it's a male dominated industry, it's going to take longer for women to get into those spots and then longer for them to climb the ladder. But as they climb the ladder, I would assume that they would operate the same way. So is this something that will slowly work its way out as women ascend the ladder, and then they're going to reach out to their female friends and they're going to get more female hires? Do you see that any possibility for something like that happening?
Well, I mean, we can always hope, but I mean, you're absolutely right to say that networks are highly gendered, and they're also racialized as well. So this also helps us to understand at least in the United States, the white male domination of this industry. In the oil and gas industry, the most powerful networks are male networks, and they often are organized around events like golf or fishing and hunting in Texas. And these are often spaces that are not especially welcoming to women. And even the women who try to integrate, they know. I had one woman tell me, I don't play golf, but I ride in the cart. Knowing full well that this is the place where you have to go in order to get yourself into these powerful networks. Um, they're not especially welcoming to women, and when women make their own networks, they're not especially powerful. They don't reach up as highly into organizations as men's networks do. So I think you're absolutely right to sort of point to networks as another phenomenon that helps us to understand why this industry has such a hard time um, diversifying.
Another question that I had was, the company that you studied was you said it's a multinational oil and gas company, so I'm assuming it's a fairly large and well established company that goes way back. But one of the interesting things about the and to be fair, they did engage. You were pretty clear that they were definitely engaging in hydraulic fracturing in the Texas area and in the U.S. So it's not like they were just doing like offshore wells somewhere. But one of the things that at least the U.S. was very much praised for in this kind of second or whatever oil revolution was these new small companies that were coming up and drilling these wells, and some of whom became larger, some of whom obviously died off in the downturn or were bought or subsumed into other companies. But did you, and maybe I don't know if you know this because I don't know how much you studied about that, but did any of these newer companies, did they suffer from the same kinds of male dominated management and such, simply because maybe they're started by the same kind of people who've been in the business forever, or were they a bit more dynamic in terms of their labor practices?
Well, you're right that I haven't studied, these small companies that are taking advantage of or cashing in on, the new oil boom. But I have always maintained that female entrepreneurship is sort of the silver lining on the dark cloud of sexism. And that is, as women get forced out of these corporate jobs, some of them take it upon themselves to start their own companies and try to go it alone, hiring other women, giving other women opportunities. Um, it's an uphill battle because the oil field itself has its own sort of cultural norms around masculinity and you know it's not for everyone. Something that I've read from other books that have been written about women in the oil industry.
Yeah, one of the interesting things was when you were talking or you were interviewing these people, both men and women, about diversity policies and how these
Mm-hmm.
like diversity policies kind of shifted to inclusion
Mm-hmm.
policies and how really it was all just kind of window dressing. And one of the men you interviewed said about this inclusion policy, expressed a lot of skepticism that it would actually change the culture of this kind of yes men at the company. And to me, it seems like a lot of, especially established companies, that they don't really want to change the culture of the yes man. Like they don't really want people coming in with new ideas. They want people with the same ideas to validate what they're already doing. So but that seems to me to be something that kind of spreads across a lot of industries. Do you see it as particularly entrenched in the oil industry? Or
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, I do see it as especially a vulnerability for the oil and gas industry. And again, I want to tie it back to this layoff idea. I think that layoffs, the culture of layoffs, breeds a culture of yes men because when you're afraid of losing your job, you're gonna go along to get along. And I had people who would say things to me like, if I knew then, like during the boom, that I should never have expressed any dissent. I should have never criticized a corporate policy. I should have never gone up against my manager, because once the layoff started, it was those dissenters that were first on the chopping block.
hmm,
So I do think a culture of layoff can breed a culture of conformity for both men and women.
hmm,
Um, Other industries are trying to do things differently. I mean, I have a student right now that's studying the high tech industry where they claim to always want to break things and reward people who go against the grain. But we'll see. We'll see what happens when they lose their funding and they decide who stays and who leaves. It's probably the case that those who get along get to stay in.
So one quick comment on the dissenting thing. There is one thing I know from working for some of these big companies is what they'll do is they'll let a lot of bad things happen, right? People having inter-office affairs potentially, or they're maybe taking a little cash on the side. I mean, I got stories for days. I got stories for days, and so I could write a book on these stories. But what happens is until they're behind on a project or they do something that's so egregious it has to be called, then they're fired. So I've seen a lot of males,
Yeah.
and I'm not saying I've never seen a female. I can't think off the top of my head of a female getting fired for this. I've seen a ton of males though who were doing a lot of bad stuff. It was getting covered because they were hitting their numbers. But as soon as they didn't hit their number, it's like all of a sudden, oh, Bob's son was getting paid to go to Notre Dame by Tom over here, and he got the boot. So I have seen that disproportionately, at least anecdotally speaking, impacts the males. Any thoughts on why why that might be?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head right there. I think that when, the wheels are turning and people are profiting, people are more willing to look the other way and to tolerate, people who are doing things probably a little bit that they shouldn't be doing. And when negative publicity comes out because of it, or when hard decisions need to be made about who stays and who leaves, I do think that makes one more vulnerable to walking the plank.
Dr. Wald, I know we got time for maybe one more question. I'll let you fire it off here.
yeah. So I guess I do want to say like a few things that I highly recommend this book. It's very easy to read. I'm not a sociologist, and so I was a little nervous about picking up a sociology book, but it was extraordinarily accessible and readable. So I really do recommend it to our readers. And I wanted to also say that one of the reasons I was particularly interested is because my mother-in-law was actually one of the first women engineers that apparently was hired by Exxon back in the 70s. She did operations research and engineering, and she was also a victim of layoffs. So, we talked a little bit about her experiences before, before I came, to do this show, and it's definitely something that's been happening more and more. But I think you're right to raise the point of, well, there's this huge push to get more women into STEM, and the other thing I did want to raise was you really debunk this, what I've always thought was this myth that there's some sort of STEM shortage in this country. Maybe you could just say a few words about that, because I think that would be of great interest to some of our listeners.
Well, this is one of the reasons I called the book Gaslighting, because I was under the impression that there was this incredible shortage of scientists and engineers, and that women were being welcomed into the oil and gas industry. Come, we need you. We have a shortage. And women, I mean, this was a national discourse too. The National Science Foundation has put a lot of resources into encouraging women and even girls to think about science careers. So, I dug into this a little bit, and the labor economists are telling us that, in fact, there's almost no evidence that there is a science and engineering shortage in this country, that this is a myth that has been cultivated by employers, lawyers. I mean, he has a long list of reasons for why this myth is so pervasive throughout our society. But really doing this study and seeing companies continually lay off the scientists, it really causes you to think. They're not only targeting women, by the way, they're also targeting older people. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of scientific talent out there, but there's a number of economic and business reasons why companies sometimes prefer to hire immigrant workers for these jobs than they are to hire these U.S.-based scientists. So I'm glad you picked up on that, because I was really gaslighted by that. I really thought there was a shortage, which made this whole question even more compelling to me. Why are women leaving?
Yep. Turns out there really isn't a shortage. It's just that, I mean, in my mind, I've always said, well, the companies just don't want to pay what these people are worth, and so they've manufactured this idea so that they can import cheap people from elsewhere. Mm-hmm. And that ties into the whole H-1B visa situation, mm-hmm. but mm-hmm. that's probably a policy debate for another time. Is it? Yeah. Any other points that you want to raise from the book?
Well, I mean, I just want to, just thank you so much for having me on your show and for taking these issues seriously. I mean, I actually think it's almost terrifying, this whole topic of science and layoffs and the silencing of engineers and scientists, because these are precisely the people in this industry that know what is at stake in fracking and drilling the earth. And if we're silencing them, it's not only them who are suffering, it's potentially all of us that are at risk.
Okay, and again, the book is called Gaslighted. The author is Christine L. Williams. We'll link to all of that in the show notes. You can check it out. Ms. Williams, thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Dr. Wall. One thing I was thinking about during that interview was, I wonder, and it'd be impossible to track this, but I wonder if you tracked all of the vendor layoffs. Because there's really two things. They have the company layoffs, but there's huge amounts of layoffs that happen through the vendor ranks, right? Yeah. So if we're working for ExxonMobil and they cut off our stuff, well, then we might lay off 15 people. That's not accounted. Yeah. It's not accounted in the ExxonMobil layoff, but it's accounted somewhere else, right? Yeah. So I wonder, and it's impossible to track something like that just because of the sheer time you have to investigate. But I did think, I wonder how that would shape or reshape or change. Do you think? She's talking about scientists, overall layoffs.
One of the interesting things that came up a couple times in the book was how these people seem to think that, like, academia would have been like better for some
Mhm.
reason, like especially like for women. And um, I wasn't in academia in the sciences. I was in academia in the humanities, and it's not very much better for women there. Like
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, like I found that like women were like some of the most hostile to other women, and women, there was still a whole lot of these same kind of biases going on in academia. So um, it's not I don't know if they would have found better. Perhaps they would have found like I don't know if they would have found a better, better workplace environment or better
Mhm.
advancement or more satisfaction in academia because, a lot of these issues are the same.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, and I'm glad she came on. It was very nice to discuss it, and it's something today
Yeah.
where it feels like these discussions, if you have them, then everyone's mad and angry, and just just trying to talk about it seems to be at least a good starting spot. So,
Yeah.
okay, where were you?
I
Go
also wonder, just because, like, with what, with a lot of people are saying, oh, we could do more with less,
ahead.
right? Like people get like, there's consolidation. Oh, the industry is so much more efficient now. It's so much more efficient. Um, but is it really?
Hmm. Hmm.
I don't know. I think that's a
Well,
good
yeah,
question.
and again, I think for this is anecdotal, but for me, the networking thing that you talked about, that plays such a huge part of all of this because the hiring, the firing, all of that stuff is somewhat tied to that. So if Bob told me to hire Ellen, well, I'm less likely to let Ellen go when times get tough because Bob's going to think less of me if I let Ellen go, right? But if Bob didn't tell me to hire Ellen, then it's different. And part of
Hmm.
that is the
Yeah.
social network. And I'm not saying that's the
Yeah.
main thing. I think it's part of the process that gets
Yeah.
hard. It gets hard to undo. And
Yeah.
so, but with that being said, I don't play golf, and that's cost me a lot of deals too. Because I've known people who they've closed huge contracts with my clients because they would go play golf with them, and I wouldn't. And so there's all kinds of things. And so, anyways, it was good to have
Yeah.
her on, and folks go check out
Yeah.
the book. And
Yeah.
you
For
know,
sure.
we
I
know on
I
this
highly
podcast
recommend it.
this is backwards. That the smart person's on this side of the screen over here. That's Dr. Wald. So that is the genius on this podcast. Okay, speaking of geniuses, where will you be this week, Dr. Wald?
This week, I will be on investing.com. And for any listeners who happen to read Portuguese, I was recently quoted in a Brazilian business article. So I think I tweeted that out. Check that out.
Okay, I saw that. Do you write Portuguese? Did you pay to get translated? Um,
No, I didn't write it. I just did an interview with a Brazilian reporter who spoke to me in English, but writes in
so how do
Portuguese.
you know? How do you know it's written right? Did you Google Translate it?
Oh, I have no idea. I'm just, assuming it's a brilliant article
Yeah, I
because,
hear you. I hear you. No
yeah,
worries. Okay. All
that's
right.
true. Very good point.
But okay, just before we send people there that can read Portuguese, like Ellen, you said that really? Okay, so inside the war room, I had Dr. Elizabeth Loftus on last week talking about memory and how people can input memories into your brain and trick you. Yes, it's a whole thing. So if you want to
Whoa.
hear about that, then you can hear Elizabeth Loftus. With that, Dr. Foreman should be on next weekish or week after.
Yeah.
So look forward to talking to him. Um,
Yeah.
and with that, we'll talk to you next week.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.